talking about market failures. We're talking about situations where an industry looks like it should be all set up to hit a nice home run, be competitively structured, grow a nice size of the pie to make the benevolent dictator very happy. But because of certain characteristics of the industry, it just doesn't get there. We talked about lots of information problems in the past, but today we want to talk about something called externalities. An externality is a cost or a benefit which is imposed on others without economic implication on the agent doing the decision, making the decision, doing the behavior. So we can think of these things as spillover effects. To repeat in a different way, sometimes when people do something, they're doing something for their own particular production decision, for their particular firm, but doing that might also have some impacts on, let's say, the neighbors or on people in another state, or, lots of different conditions could happen that they're not really taking them into consideration when they make that decision. Those impacts could be beneficial. That's why the term benefit is in there. If that's true, they're not understanding that the things they're doing is actually making other people happy. Therefore, they're not taking that into consideration when they make their decisions. The benevolent dictator doesn't like that. They also could be things that make people unhappy. That is, they could put costs on other people, raising their costs so that your situation might not be such a bad deal in terms of the consumer surplus and producer surplus from your particular industry, but you may have these spillover effects on another industry which causes their pie to shrink. Not good. Okay. And so let's characterize these as two different terms: negative externality and positive externality. Negative externality is when the externality is it imposes costs on other people. So there's lots of examples of these. Recently, for those of us who live in Illinois and read the Chicago newspapers, there's been some class action lawsuits by people who live near O'Hare. They bought houses near O'Hare, and since they bought their houses, O'Hare has decided to expand. So they put in a couple new runways, and the runways have patterns where planes come in and go out in particularly nasty ways for these people. And so the lawsuits, I'm not chuckling because these are really serious problems, but the suit cites the fact that these planes come in so low that they're actually tearing shingles off of their roofs, making the sort of china shake in their house because these planes are coming in over a residential area that was built when there wasn't a runway there, but now that this runway is there, it's really causing a change in life for them. Here's a case where the airlines are using that to move people in and out in a very vibrant industry called air travel, and it's having some negative impacts on other people. We can think of other things, and we will talk about one of the most notorious of negative externalities is pollution. When you produce steel, people like steel. It makes for cars, it makes us allows us to build big buildings, but the production of steel also comes with sort of some emissions that come out of the smokestacks, and some of those things can be pretty damaging to people who live in the communities around that steel plant. Positive externalities are the other side of the coin. It's when you do something that benefits you, but it also has spillover effects on other people. So let's build an example for this. Landscaping. People who do empirical studies of housing markets will tell you that landscaping is one of the best things, not just for your house, but for your neighbors' houses. If you were to put a nice landscaping project on your house in a nice residential area, not only does your house go up in value, but your neighbors' houses go up in value. The people right beside you go up higher. 2 doors down, they go high, but not quite as much. 3 doors down, they'll also go up, but not quite as much as the others. You kind of get the idea here. The problem is that when you're making your decision, you go to a landscape architect, and she brings back 5 different estimates. She says, well, look, for $3,000 I can do this, for $5,000 I can do this, for $10,000 I can do this, for $12,000 I can do this, and for $20,000 I can do this. Now, they're all really good, and you're going to make a decision based on what? Based on your value, because it's your money in your house. Now, it turns out that if a benevolent dictator could help, she would like you to make the decision based on everybody else's because the whole neighborhood's value is going to go up. But they're not paying you. That's a spillover that you don't get any benefit back. I mean, you can go back next door and knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, thinking about doing a nice landscaping project for my house. How would you like to kick some money in? They're just going to say, sorry, it's your house. I'm thinking about for my house too, but you do what you want. So this is a problem. It's a good problem in the sense that there is positive benefits, but you're just not taking that into consideration. So the size of the pie you're worried about is your own, and since you're not putting the bigger project in, you're missing the growth on some of your neighbors. Where's this problem come from? Well, the problem is for a lack of well-defined property rights. Okay? Think of it this way. At the end of the day, if suppose you're working the night shift at a restaurant, a pizza restaurant here in Champaign. We got lots of pizza restaurants. It's a big college town. And the manager says, listen, at the end of the day, we got a lot of garbage we got to get rid of. We got some uneaten pizza crusts. We got some empty flour bags. We got a lot of plastic plates, plastic cups, plastic paper plates. I want you to bag them all up, and on your way home, throw them into Brock's yard. Well, that's a solution to your waste problem. You can take that stuff and throw it into Brock's yard. The problem is, when you throw that stuff into Brock's yard, I'm going to see all that stuff. I'm going to look at the garbage. I'm going to see which restaurant it came from. I'm going to call the cops on you. That's my private property. On the other hand, suppose you could somehow dump your waste in an area where it wasn't private property. Think about companies think about Gary, Indiana. There are large steel firms in Gary, Indiana, and they are kicking out emissions that float over the town. There's been tons of studies of Gary, Indiana about how you have to paint your house more frequently, about how cars can rust out faster than they would in other communities because of the particulate matter of this emissions from the steel plants floating over the city. Healthcare costs are higher. The problem in this case is that nobody owns the air above their house. If you're a homeowner in Gary, Indiana, you look up at that column of air and you see it's dirty. There's smog up there. There's all sorts of stuff, but you can't charge them for that. If you dump it on my land, I've got a deed for my land. But if you dump it on the air, there's nobody have that. You know, if you go upstate New York, head north up through the Hudson River Valley. Now, the Hudson River, beautiful place. Hudson River looks like this. If you know anything about housing, people like to build their houses on water. If you look at the prices of housing in the suburbs, the northern suburbs of Chicago, the ones right on Lake Michigan, very high cost for those tracts of land. 1 block away, still quite expensive. Not as much as being right on the water. 2 blocks away, still very expensive, but not as much as being closer to the water. People like to build their house on the water. You got a lot of wealthy people in Manhattan. They're looking for a weekend house. You might think that this Hudson River Valley, a beautiful area with the Hudson River, would be a place where people would like to locate. But in fact, if you were to look up there, all you'd really see is a bunch of old, sometimes closed factories located right on the river. And so the question is, why did that happen? Well, when they would build these factories, when they put the concrete floor down, they would put big drains into the concrete floor, and the drains would go out the back and dump into the Hudson River. At the end of the day, when they're cleaning their equipment up, there's like metal shavings, there's maybe some petroleum, they just hose it all down. It goes down in that pipe and right out into the Hudson River. Nobody owned the Hudson River, and come on, what's the big deal? I got a little water in the Hudson River. Well, of course, the problem was that lots of people did this. Lots of people used the Hudson River because it was a free disposal. Instead of having to pay a company to come take their dirty water out and to clean it back up, they just dumped it out the back into the river. Changed the temperature of the river, changed the character of the river. The river green stuff started to die. When the green stuff started to die, the fish started to die. Not a good deal. Okay, this was really culminated in the 60s, where if you're my age, you get to see on CBS Evening News Walter Cronkite showing a picture of the Cuyahoga River spontaneously combusting in Cleveland. Downtown Cleveland, in the middle of the day, the river would spontaneously combust. It wasn't really a river anymore. It was just a big petrochemical sludge pit. It had been used as a way to freely dump the free disposal for manufacturers. There were no fish alive in that. And it was, as a kid, it was kind of cool to see fire trucks shooting water on a river, but they had to try and stop this. This led to the movement that created something called the Environmental Protection Agency. And the EPA basically said, well, it's true. Nobody seems to have property rights for the river. Nobody seems to have property rights for our air. We do. They belong to the United States citizens, and we're going to start taking charge of those as if we owned it, just like Toprak owns his land and would make sure you didn't do anything to damage that. We're going to take control of this. So going forward, we're going to look at how the government could intervene in these particular situations and try to mitigate some of these effects. It's not that these people who were committing pollution got their kicks out of watching the river burn. It's that they were in a very competitive market, and if they were going to be the only people who were going to just go out and spend a lot of money on having their waste properly disposed of compared to what their rivals were doing, they would get undercut and be out of the market. Somehow we have to make them understand, everybody understand, what the cost of using that resource is. That's what the EPA is all about.